In this clip we will look at statistics and some other miscellaneous functions. Specifically we look at the standard deviation of a population and a sample, then the expected value and standard deviation of a random variable. We learn how to use the factorial function, permutations and combinations, and I'll wrap up by showing some very helpful buttons on your calculator. So let us say this is our data and we want to calculate the standard deviation. Now, as you've studied, there is a standard deviation assuming that this is a sample, and then we can also calculate a standard deviation assuming that this is the entire population. The calculator allows you to do both. Now in this case we are entering data, so the first step is to enter the data function, and we do that by hitting second data. So now we are going to enter data. To be safe, we should first make sure that all the data is 0. So we hit second clear work, and then we can start entering the numbers. The first number is 15, so we do 15, enter, and down arrow. Then you see a y. In this case we are just working with one variable, so we will ignore the y's. We will only enter the x values. So we hit the down arrow. X2 is -5, so we hit 5 plus minus, enter. Down arrow, again skip past the y, so hit down arrow again. X3 is 12, so we hit 12, enter. Down arrow, ignore the y, move on to X4, that is 22, enter. So now we have entered all the data, but we need to calculate statistics related to this data. So we get into the statistics mode, and we do that by hitting second stat. Then we need to tell the calculator that we are in single variable mode. So we have to hit second set repeatedly until we see 1-V. This implies that we are in a single variable mode. Then we hit the down arrow, and this will now give us all the data that we entered. N is equal to 4 means that we entered 4 data points. X bar is the average, so the average value of the 4 numbers is 11. Then down arrow. Sx is the standard deviation assuming that this is a sample, and then down arrow again. Sigma x is the standard deviation assuming that this is a population. If your question requires you to come up with a variance, then you can simply take this and square it. So you can hit the x squared number, and that gives you the variance. Next, expected value and standard deviation of a random variable. Now let's say a random variable is EPS, or earnings per share. These are the 3 possible values of the random variable, and we also have probabilities. So the probability that the value will be 9 is 0.4, and so on. So we are given 3 probabilities and then 3 possible values. How do we enter this, and how do we come up with the standard deviation? The first step here is to get into data mode, so we do second data, and then we should make sure the registers are clear, so we do second clear work. X01 is the first possible value for the random variable, which is 9, so we enter 9. Then in the y value we need to put in the percentage chance of this variable. Now a probability of 0.4 means a 40% chance, so we are going to enter 40 here and then go down. The second possible value of the random variable is 6, so we enter that. This has a probability of 50%, so we hit down arrow and enter 50. Then we go to the third possible value, which is 1, so enter that. This has a probability of 0.1 or 10%, so we enter 10. Now here we have entered all the data, so we need to get into statistics mode, and we do that by hitting second stat. The display should be one variable, which we have, otherwise we can hit second set until we get to one variable. Then we hit the down arrow. N is 100, and this is what it needs to be because we've entered 3 probabilities. 40%, 50% and 10%, those probabilities need to add up to 100, and if they add up to 100, then n is going to be 100 over here. If you see something other than 100, then you have entered something incorrect and you need to redo this. You hit down arrow again. The expected value is 6.7. The sample standard deviation is this number. The population standard deviation is this number, and again, if you need the variance, then you can simply take this number and square it. Now we will look at how to come up with the factorial and then permutations and combinations. So this is fairly straightforward. Let's say we want to do 4 factorial, and we do that by hitting 4 second and then factorial. So 4 factorial is 4 into 3 into 2, which is 24. Then let's say we want to do 6p2, which is basically selecting 2 items out of 6 where the order matters, and the way we do that is 6 and then second npr and then 2 is equal to, so that is 30. Then let's say we want to do 6c2, so here the process is the same, so 6 second ncr 2 is equal to, and that is 15. It's very helpful sometimes to store a value and then use it later. You can store by hitting this button. So let's say that you have this number 4 and you want to store it. You can store this in register 1 by hitting store 1 and then clear. Now the number 4 has been stored in the first register. Let's say you want to store 5 in the second register, so then you hit 5 and then store 2 and then clear. Now let's say you want to recall what you had stored in the first bin, so you can simply do recall 1 and that number was 4. Say you want to multiply this with what you had in the second storage bin, so you can do multiply by recall 2, which was 5, is equal to. So notice you can store numbers and then recall the numbers that you have stored. Another useful button is the backspace button, which is over here. Let's say you want to enter a number 4, 5, 6, 8, but instead of 8 you accidentally press 7. You can just remove the 7 by hitting this button and then come back to 8. You don't have to erase the whole number. You can just hit this button and backspace 1 digit. And now the exponent, let's say you want to do 1.04 raised to the power of 3. The way you do this is 1.04 and then you do y to the power of x and then 3 is equal to, and you get your answer. So that is it. I hope you found these calculator tutorials useful. To truly master your calculator, you need to do a lot of practice. So make sure that every time you are working through CFA problems, you do so using your calculators. That is it for now.